Good day, friends. I want you to pause for a moment and consider this life often feels like a journey through a winding road. You make plans, set goals, and work diligently, but at times it feels like the destination is farther than you imagine. The promises you're holding on to may seem delayed, the vision in your heart may appear too great, and the challenges before you seem insurmountable. But let me tell you, this God is a God of surprises, and his timing is perfect. You see, in the grand design of the Creator, no moment is wasted. Every delay, every challenge, and every detour is part of a divine setup. While you're busy wondering when or how God is orchestrating events behind the scenes. What feels like stagnation to you is God preparing you for acceleration. Let's take a moment to reflect on a principle of God's kingdom. He always fulfills his word. When God makes a promise, he commits his integrity to it. And because God cannot lie, he cannot fail. So if you're holding on to a promise today, a dream he placed in your heart, a breakthrough you've been praying for, or a restoration you've been believing in, know this: God will surprise you, and it will be sudden. But here's the key: divine surprises are often wrapped in the ordinary. You may be tending your sheep in the field like David, and suddenly God calls you to the throne. You may be carrying lunch to your brothers like Joseph, and suddenly you find yourself interpreting dreams for kings. You may even be fishing on an ordinary day like Peter, and suddenly you're called to walk on water. The Bible says in Habakkuk 2:3, though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not delay. This means that God's timing is never early and never late. It is always on time. When the surprise comes, it will exceed your expectations, because God doesn't just meet needs, he exceeds them. Now, here's what I want you to do. Stay faithful where you are. Don't despise the small beginnings. Don't grow weary in well-doing. The seeds you've sown in faith, in tears, and sacrifice, they are about to bear fruit. The doors you thought were closed forever are about to swing open. And when God surprises you, it won't just bless you, it will bless everyone connected to you. That's the beauty of God's surprises. They are never just about you. They are about his kingdom. They are about his glory. So lift up your eyes. The season of waiting is coming to an end. Prepare yourself for the sudden move of God. The breakthrough you've been praying for, the answer you've been seeking, it is closer than you think. And when it comes, it will leave you speechless, because God's surprises are always greater than we could ever imagine. Remember, my friend, God will surprise you very soon. Get ready to testify. Life is a journey often filled with uncertainties, delays, and detours. At times, it feels like everything you've worked for, prayed for, or dreamed of is either taking too long or not happening at all. But what we must understand is this: God is always working behind the scenes. Though we may not see it or feel it, his hand is constantly at work, weaving the threads of our lives into a masterpiece we cannot yet comprehend. The human perspective is limited. We see things through the lens of time and space, often forgetting that God exists outside of both. We measure progress by what we can see, hear, and touch, but God's work is often invisible, happening in the spiritual realm long before it manifests in the physical. Just because you don't see evidence of movement doesn't mean God is idle. He is always active, always preparing, always aligning circumstances for his purpose in your life. Consider a seed planted deep in the soil. To the naked eye, nothing is happening. Days turn into weeks, and still the surface of the soil appears unchanged. But beneath the surface, an extraordinary process is unfolding. The seed is germinating, taking root, and beginning its transformation into what it was designed to be. Similarly, God is working beneath the surface of your life. You may not see the roots forming, but they are there, anchoring you for the growth and breakthrough to come. When God is working behind the scenes, it often feels like waiting, and waiting can be hard. It challenges our patience, our faith, and our trust in his promises. But waiting is not wasted time. In fact, it's in the waiting that God does some of his best work. He uses the delays to prepare you, to refine your character, and to strengthen your faith. Sometimes the very thing you are waiting for isn't ready for you yet, or perhaps you aren't ready for it. God, in his infinite wisdom, ensures that everything aligns perfectly before he reveals what he's been working on. I think about the story of Joseph. He had a dream, a vision from God that he would rise to a position of great influence and leadership. But instead of walking directly into his destiny, Joseph found himself sold into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned. From the outside, it seemed as though his life was moving in the opposite direction of God's promise. Yet throughout Joseph's journey, God was working behind the scenes. He was positioning Joseph exactly where he needed to be, orchestrating every event to prepare him for the moment when he would step into his purpose as a leader who would save nations from famine. God's behind the scenes work often involves layers of preparation that we cannot perceive. While you're focused on what isn't happening, He's aligning the right people, opening the right doors, and creating opportunities that are beyond your imagination. Sometimes He even allows certain doors to close, not to punish you, but to redirect you towards something greater. What feels like rejection is often God's redirection. Another profound example is the life of Esther. An orphan girl, she could never have imagined that she would become queen and play a pivotal role in saving her people. Yet God was working behind the scenes, orchestrating events that would place her in the palace for such a time as this. Esther didn't see the full picture as it was unfolding, but she trusted God's sovereignty. When the moment came, she realized that everything, every detail, every delay, every difficulty had been divinely arranged for a greater purpose. And one of the challenges we face when God is working behind the scenes is the temptation to take matters into our own hands. We often feel the need to control the process, to force outcomes, or to manipulate circumstances. But when we do this, we risk stepping out of alignment with God's plan. Trusting that He is working behind the scenes requires surrender. It requires letting go of our need to see the full picture and embracing the mystery of His ways. Isaiah 55:8-9 reminds us, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." This scripture highlights the vast difference between our understanding and God's. What may seem like silence or inactivity to us is often God's deliberate and strategic work. God's work behind the scenes also involves building your faith. Faith is not developed in moments of clarity and certainty. It grows in the unseen, in the times when you have no evidence to rely on except God's word. It's in those moments of waiting and wondering that your faith is tested and strengthened. When you hold on to His promises despite what you see, you're demonstrating trust in His character, and God honors faith. The Apostle Paul wrote in Romans 8:28, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." Notice it doesn't say some things, it says all things. This means that every part of your life, even the parts that seem broken or messy, is being woven into God's perfect plan. Nothing is wasted. The disappointments, the delays, the detours, they all serve a purpose in God's hands. Perhaps the most profound example of God working behind the scenes is seen in the life of Jesus. From the moment of His birth, God was orchestrating events that would lead to the fulfillment of His ultimate plan of redemption. Jesus' crucifixion, which appeared to be a moment of defeat, was actually the greatest victory in history. While His disciples mourned and the world mocked, God was at work, bringing about the resurrection that would change everything. This teaches us that even in the darkest moments, God is at work. When life seems to crumble around you, when prayers seem unanswered, and when hope feels distant, remember this: God has not abandoned you. He is working in ways you cannot see, preparing a surprise that will exceed your expectations. So as you navigate the uncertainties of life, hold on to this truth: God is always working behind the scenes. His plans are bigger than your perspective. His timing is better than your schedule, and His surprises are greater than your imagination. Trust Him, for He is faithful. Divine surprises come suddenly and often exceed our expectations because they are a testament to God's ability to work beyond our comprehension. When we think about surprises, we usually associate them with something unexpected and delightful. But God's surprises are not just delightful, they are transformative. They are events that shatter our limited views, elevate our faith, and remind us of His sovereignty and goodness. We live in a world where we often plan and strategize every detail of our lives, trying to control outcomes and secure our futures. However, God's ways are not our ways, and His thoughts are not our thoughts. He operates in the realm of the miraculous, where the impossible becomes possible and the improbable becomes reality. Divine surprises are the manifestation of God's supernatural power in our natural world, proving that He is still at work in ways we cannot always predict or foresee. A divine surprise is when God moves in a way that is beyond what we have asked for or imagined. It's when the door you thought was closed swings open wide, when the opportunity you had given up on suddenly reappears, when the healing you've been praying for is instantaneous and complete. Divine surprises often arrive at the most unexpected times, when you least expect them, when you've almost given up hope, or when you've decided to take a different path. It's as if God waits until the moment you're least expecting, when you've let go of the reins and surrendered the outcome to Him, to reveal His plan in its fullness. Imagine the moment when Peter walked on water. Peter didn't expect it, nor did he think it was possible. But when he stepped out of the boat in faith, the impossible became reality. That's a divine surprise. It's when God takes the ordinary and makes it extraordinary, turning our limitations into platforms for His glory. Peter's surprise didn't just bless him, it astonished the other disciples and demonstrated God's power to everyone who witnessed it. God's surprises don't just touch the lives of the recipients, they often impact those around them, sparking faith and wonder in others. In the Bible, the story of Esther is another beautiful example of a divine surprise. Esther was an orphan, a Jewish girl who had no reason to expect that she would one day become queen. Yet God placed her in the palace for such a time as this. Her rise to queen was not just about her own life, it was about God's larger plan to save the Jewish people from annihilation. When she risked her life to approach the king, the result was not just her safety and the preservation of her people, it was a divine reversal of the enemy's plan. What could have been a tragedy turned into a victory, and it happened in a way that no one could have foreseen. This was a divine surprise that exceeded everyone's expectations, revealing God's perfect timing and his ability to turn seemingly impossible situations around. Another example from Scripture is the life of Abraham and Sarah. When God promised them a child in their old age, it seemed laughable, even absurd. They were past the age of bearing children, and yet God's promise was fulfilled. Isaac was born not just as a fulfillment of God's promise, but as a testament to his ability to do the impossible. When Isaac's birth was announced, it was a divine surprise that exceeded Abraham and Sarah's expectations and brought joy to their family and community. This event was not just a gift to Abraham and Sarah, it was a reminder of God's faithfulness and power to bring life out of dead circumstances. Divine surprises often exceed expectations because they are not just about meeting our needs, they are about demonstrating God's glory. They are about showing that he is not confined to our limitations, that his ways are higher, and that his thoughts are beyond our understanding. God's surprises are not mere coincidences, they are divine interventions, and they serve to strengthen our faith and draw us closer to him. When God surprises you, it's an invitation to trust him more deeply, to release control, and to embrace the mystery of his plan for your life. These surprises often arrive after a season of waiting, during times of struggle, or when we least expect them. It's as though God waits until the moment is ripe, until our faith is ready to be tested and stretched. He uses the waiting period to build our endurance, to deepen our dependence on him, and to prepare us for the moment when his blessing will be revealed. It's not just about the blessing itself, it's about the journey, the lessons learned, and the intimacy gained with him along the way. When God surprises you, it's not just about changing your circumstances, it's about changing you. It's about transforming your heart, your perspective, and your faith. It's about teaching you to trust him in ways you never thought possible, to believe in the miraculous, and to see his hand at work in every detail of your life. Divine surprises are about more than just what happens to you. They are about what God is doing in you and through you. So as you walk through life, holding on to the promises God has given you, remember this, his surprises are coming. The breakthrough you've been waiting for, the answer to your prayers, the provision you've been seeking, it's on its way. And when it comes, it will be beyond what you could have asked for or imagined. Keep your faith strong, your hope alive, and your eyes fixed on him, because God's surprises often come suddenly and exceed expectations in ways that leave you in awe of his goodness and power. Faithfulness in the ordinary is the cornerstone that prepares you for the extraordinary. We often find ourselves longing for the extraordinary, the breakthrough, the success, the recognition, but what we fail to realize is that the extraordinary rarely comes without first being shaped by the ordinary. We live in a world that celebrates the spectacular, the dramatic, the attention-grabbing moments that shine brightly in the spotlight. However, the foundation of those moments is built in the unseen, unnoticed, and often mundane moments that make up the bulk of our lives. These moments of faithfulness in the ordinary are what shape our character, refine our skills, and build our capacity for greater things. When we look at the lives of those who have accomplished great things, we often see the visible results, the victories, the triumphs, the accolades. What we don't always see is the quiet, often unnoticed work that went into preparing them for those moments. We don't see the years of discipline, sacrifice, and faithfulness that were required to reach the extraordinary. And we see David as the giant slayer, but we don't often think about the years he spent tending sheep in the field, learning to protect and care for something small before he was trusted with something great. And we see Joseph as a ruler in Egypt, but we forget the years he spent in the prison, working in obscurity before he was placed in his position of authority. The extraordinary moments in their lives were not accidents, they were the results of faithfulness in the ordinary. Faithfulness in the ordinary is about doing what you are called to do, even when it seems insignificant. It's about showing up every day, doing your best, even when no one is watching, and even when the results seem small or delayed. It's about embracing the tasks that may seem mundane and repetitive, but are critical in the process of growth. Whether it's in your job, your relationships, or your personal development, faithfulness in the small things is what prepares you for greater responsibility and impact. The Bible is full of examples of individuals who were faithful in ordinary tasks before being entrusted with extraordinary things. Think of Moses. He spent 40 years tending sheep in the wilderness, a job that many would consider to be beneath him, especially when you consider that he had once lived in the palace of Pharaoh. But during those years, God was preparing Moses for something far greater than he could have imagined. God was shaping his character, teaching him patience, humility, and leadership. When Moses was called to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, he was not starting from scratch. He had already learned the vital lessons of faithfulness and perseverance in the wilderness, in the ordinary. Similarly, when Jesus called his disciples, he didn't call the most powerful or influential people in society. Instead, he called fishermen, tax collectors, and ordinary men who had not yet been recognized for their potential. They were faithful in their everyday lives, doing their jobs, living in their communities when they were called to follow him. It was in that ordinary faithfulness that Jesus saw the potential for greatness. He didn't call them because they were already extraordinary. He called them because he knew that their faithfulness in the ordinary would prepare them for the extraordinary mission he had for them. Faithfulness in the ordinary is about cultivating a spirit of excellence, even in the small tasks. It's easy to become discouraged when your efforts seem unnoticed or unrewarded. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that your work doesn't matter because no one is celebrating it. But God sees your faithfulness. He sees every effort, every sacrifice, every moment of persistence, even when it feels like no one else does. And he rewards faithfulness. The Bible says in Luke 16:10, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. This verse reveals an important truth. God is watching how we handle the small things. He knows that if we can be faithful in the ordinary, he can trust us with the extraordinary. If we are diligent with the little tasks, he will prepare us for the big tasks. Another critical aspect of faithfulness in the ordinary is that it prepares us to handle the challenges that come with the extraordinary. When we are faithful in the small, less glamorous tasks, we develop endurance, resilience, and patience. These are qualities that are necessary when the stakes are higher and the pressure increases. Just as an athlete trains in the off-season, pushing through the ordinary routines and exercises, so too do we need to train in the ordinary to be ready for the extraordinary. The challenges of the extraordinary can overwhelm us if we haven't developed the inner strength to withstand them. The work of faithfulness in the ordinary strengthens us for what is to come. The ordinary also provides us with the opportunity to grow in areas that will be crucial when the extraordinary moments arrive. It is in the quiet moments of preparation that we learn the lessons that will serve us later. The discipline we cultivate in the ordinary prepares us for the responsibility we will face in the extraordinary. Think about a musician who practices scales and techniques for hours on end. Those hours spent in practice may seem dull, but they are the foundation for the music they will one day play on a grand stage. The same is true in our lives. The small, seemingly insignificant moments of faithfulness in our work, relationships, and personal growth build the foundation for the extraordinary tasks we are called to in the future. Faithfulness in the ordinary also teaches us the importance of consistency. Extraordinary things don't happen overnight. They are the result of consistent effort over time. We live in a culture that values instant results, but the reality is that the extraordinary is built slowly and steadily. God's timing is not ours, and often the preparation for the extraordinary takes much longer than we expect. In those moments when we are working quietly without immediate rewards or recognition, we must trust that God is preparing us for something greater. The small steps we take each day are leading us to the fulfillment of the promises he has given us. It's easy to look at others who are experiencing extraordinary breakthroughs and wonder why it hasn't happened for us yet. But the key to the extraordinary is rooted in our faithfulness in the ordinary. God does not overlook the work you are doing today, even if it feels insignificant. He is watching how you handle the tasks he's entrusted to you, and he is using them to prepare you for something greater. The work you're doing right now may be the very thing that is shaping you for the extraordinary season that lies ahead. In every area of life, whether in work, relationships, or personal growth, being faithful in the ordinary is the key to being prepared for the extraordinary. It's about showing up every day, doing your best, and trusting that God is using those small moments to prepare you for something greater. When you are faithful in the little things, you open the door for God to do extraordinary things in your life. God's timing is perfect and unfailing, a truth that many of us struggle to fully understand and embrace, especially when we find ourselves waiting for answers, praying for breakthroughs, or longing for change. In the midst of uncertainty, it's easy to wonder why things seem to be moving so slowly or why some prayers seem to go unanswered. But one of the most comforting and powerful aspects of our faith is the understanding that God's timing is never off. His timing is not only perfect, it's also unfailing. Even in the moments when we feel like we're in limbo, God is working in ways that we may not see, but that will ultimately lead to his perfect plan for our lives. When we talk about God's timing, we are not speaking of time as we understand it. We live in a world where time is measured by clocks and calendars, by hours, minutes, and seconds. Our concept of time is linear, and we expect things to unfold in a certain sequence today, tomorrow, and the day after that. We anticipate events to occur at the right moment as we have planned. But God, in his infinite wisdom and sovereignty, exists outside of time. He is not bound by the constraints of human schedules or expectations. He sees the beginning from the end, and his perspective is eternal. Because of this, his timing is always perfect, even when it doesn't align with our understanding or desires. One of the first things we must recognize is that God's timing is always on time, never early, never late, but exactly when it needs to be. There are moments in life when we feel like we've been waiting forever, and we begin to question whether God has forgotten us or whether his promises will ever come to pass. But the truth is that God is never late. He is always right on time. His delays are not denials, and his timing is never a mistake. It's often in the waiting that he is preparing us for the fulfillment of his promises. The Bible tells us that there is a time for everything under the heavens, and each season has its purpose. Ecclesiastes 3:1 says, there is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. We must remember that just because we don't see immediate results doesn't mean that God isn't working. In fact, waiting is often a vital part of God's plan. It is during these waiting periods that God is refining us, strengthening our faith, teaching us patience, and aligning us with his will. We may be eager for things to happen on our timeline, but God knows exactly when we are ready for the blessings he has in store. Sometimes the delay isn't about what God is doing for us, but rather about what he is doing in us. The perfect timing of God can be illustrated through the story of Abraham and Sarah. God promised Abraham that he would become the father of many nations, but this promise did not come to pass immediately. In fact, Abraham and Sarah waited for years, well into their old age, before the child of promise, Isaac, was born. For decades, they held on to a promise that seemed impossible, as Sarah's womb was barren, and both were beyond the age of childbearing. During this waiting period, they made mistakes, tried to take matters into their own hands, and doubted God's faithfulness. Yet, in the end, when all seemed lost and hope seemed dim, God fulfilled his promise. Isaac was born, and through him, the nation of Israel would be established. In this story, God's timing was not based on human logic or convenience. He waited until it was absolutely impossible in the natural, so that when the miracle came, it would be unmistakably his work. This story reminds us that God's perfect timing often requires patience, but his promises will always come to pass. In our own lives, it is easy to get discouraged when we feel like our prayers are unanswered or that the breakthrough we are waiting for is taking too long. However, we must trust that God's perfect timing is not just a matter of our circumstances lining up, but is also a matter of our hearts aligning with his will. When we wait on God's timing, he is often preparing us for something greater than we can see in the moment. It is in the waiting that we grow. It is in the waiting that we learn to trust more fully in his faithfulness. And it is in the waiting that we are positioned for the miracles that are yet to come. Another powerful example of God's perfect timing is seen in the story of Joseph. Joseph had a dream as a young man that one day he would be in a position of great authority, ruling over his family. However, his journey to that destiny was anything but easy. He was sold into slavery by his brothers, falsely accused of a crime, and thrown into prison. For many years, Joseph was forgotten by those who had promised to help him, and it seemed as though his dreams would never come to pass. Yet in God's perfect timing, everything changed. Joseph was suddenly elevated from the prison to the palace, where he became second in command to Pharaoh. Through this promotion, Joseph was in a position to save his family and the entire nation of Egypt from famine. What appeared to be a series of setbacks was actually God's perfect plan unfolding. God's timing is often hidden in the midst of life's challenges, but when the moment comes, it will be clear that his hand has been at work all along. Joseph's story is a reminder that God's perfect timing is not always understood in the moment, but it is always purposeful. God's timing is also perfect in the way that he orchestrates the events of our lives for his greater purpose. Sometimes we may not understand why things are happening or why certain doors are closed, but God is constantly at work behind the scenes, positioning us and aligning us with the people, places, and opportunities that will fulfill his plan. There may be moments when it seems like we are stuck or that we are being overlooked, but we can trust that God is preparing us for what's next. When the time is right, the doors will open, the opportunities will appear, and everything will fall into place according to his perfect will. One of the greatest assurances we have as believers is that God's timing is unfailing. His timing is not only perfect, but it is also unchanging and steadfast. We may falter in our understanding of his timing, but he never does. His promises are true and his word never fails. The book of Isaiah reminds us of this unwavering truth. So is my word that goes out from my mouth. It will not return to me empty, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purpose for which I sent it. Isaiah 55:11. When God speaks, it is as if he is setting something into motion that cannot be undone. His timing is certain, and he is always faithful to fulfill his promises. Even in the moments when it feels like nothing is happening, God is still at work, and his timing is still perfect. As we walk through life, it's crucial that we learn to trust God's timing even when we don't understand it. Trusting in his timing means surrendering our own plans and desires and acknowledging that he knows better than we do. It's about letting go of our need for control and allowing God to work in his own way and at his own pace. We can trust that his timing will never fail us, even in the moments when it seems like things are delayed or when it feels like we are waiting for answers. In the end, God's timing is perfect because it is rooted in his love, wisdom, and sovereignty. He knows exactly what we need and when we need it. His plans are always for our good, and he is always working in our lives, even when we don't see it. His timing may not always align with our own, but it is always designed to bring about the best for us, for his kingdom and for his glory. When we trust in God's perfect and unfailing timing, we can have peace, knowing that everything will unfold as it should at just the right time. God's blessings impact more than just the recipient. While it's easy to think of blessings as gifts or provisions given to individuals, they often ripple out far beyond the person receiving them, touching families, communities, and even nations. In fact, God's blessings have an expansive reach because they are meant not only to enrich our lives, but also to fulfill his purpose for the world. The blessings God bestows upon us are never meant to stop with us. They are tools to be used for a greater good, spreading his love, grace, and goodness far beyond our immediate circumstances. When we look at the biblical examples of God's blessings, we see that they often carry with them a deep sense of responsibility. Blessings are not given merely for personal enjoyment or self-indulgence. They are given to equip individuals to serve others and to carry out God's work in the world. From the very beginning, God's blessing of Adam and Eve was not just for their benefit, but also for the flourishing of all creation. In Genesis 1:28, God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." The blessing was not just for Adam and Eve to enjoy the earth, but to steward it, care for it, and multiply it for the benefit of future generations. Even in the Garden of Eden, before sin entered the world, God's blessings were tied to a larger purpose that went beyond individual enjoyment. The story of Abraham is another powerful example of how God's blessings are meant to impact more than just the person receiving them. In Genesis 12:2-3, God promises Abraham, "I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." God's blessing on Abraham was not just for Abraham's benefit. It was a blessing that was intended to extend to the entire world. Through Abraham's descendants, the nation of Israel, God's blessings would flow to all people. This promise culminates in Jesus Christ, the ultimate fulfillment of God's promise to bless the nations through Abraham. Jesus, a descendant of Abraham, came to bring salvation not just to the Israelites, but to the entire world. Through Abraham's blessing, the world would experience the gift of grace, redemption, and eternal life. God's blessings in Abraham's life were never meant to stop with him. They were meant to have a global impact, reaching far beyond his immediate family or nation. Similarly, in the New Testament, Jesus teaches us that the blessings we receive from God are meant to be shared with others. In Matthew 5:14-16, Jesus tells his followers, "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." Here, Jesus is emphasizing that the blessings of light, truth, and goodness that come from God are not to be hoarded, but to be shared. The light that God places in us through his blessings is meant to illuminate the world, drawing others to him. Our lives are meant to be a reflection of God's goodness, and as such, we are called to allow his blessings to flow through us to others so that the world can see his glory and come to know his love. The Apostle Paul also speaks to the idea that blessings are meant to impact others in his letter to the Corinthians. In 2 Corinthians 9:8, he writes, "And God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work." God blesses us abundantly, not just so that we can enjoy his blessings for ourselves, but so that we can abound in good works that bless others. Paul makes it clear that God's blessings are a means by which we can serve others, meet their needs, and spread the message of his love. The abundance that we receive from God is meant to be shared, and through our generosity and service to others, his blessings multiply and have an even greater impact. When we recognize that we are blessed to be a blessing, we begin to see that our lives are part of a much larger story, one in which God's goodness flows through us to touch the lives of others. In a very practical sense, God's blessings can impact those around us in ways we may never fully understand. When we are blessed with resources, whether financial, emotional, or relational, we are called to use those resources to help others. So when God blesses us with wisdom, knowledge, or spiritual gifts, we are called to share those gifts with others to teach, encourage, and build up those around us. When God blesses us with a family, a community, or a church, we are meant to invest in those relationships, nurturing them and allowing them to grow in love and unity. God's blessings are not only for our personal growth or enjoyment, they are tools for the growth of his kingdom, for the building up of his church, and for the flourishing of society. In the Old Testament, God also set up systems within Israel to ensure that blessings would flow to those in need. The laws around tithing, gleaning, and caring for the poor were all part of God's plan to ensure that his blessings would have a far-reaching impact. In Deuteronomy 15:10-11, God commands the Israelites, give generously to them and do so without a grudging heart. Then because of this, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in everything you put your hand to. There will always be poor people in the land. Therefore, I command you to be open-handed toward your fellow Israelites who are poor and needy in your land. This command to be open-handed and generous was meant to ensure that the blessings God gave to his people were shared with those who were less fortunate. The blessing of abundance was never meant to create inequality or division. It was meant to be shared in community so that all would benefit. When we look at the blessings God has given us, whether material, relational, or spiritual, we should be aware that they are meant to be stewarded and used for the benefit of others. The blessings we receive from God can have a ripple effect that impacts our families, our communities, and even the world. When we use our blessings to serve others, we are participating in God's redemptive work in the world. We become instruments of his love, grace, and provision, allowing his blessings to flow through us in ways that bring hope, healing, and transformation. Furthermore, God's blessings also have the power to impact future generations. In Deuteronomy 7:9, it says, know therefore that the Lord your God is God. He is the faithful God, keeping his covenant of love to 1,000 generations of those who love him and keep his commandments. The blessings God gives to us are not just for our generation. They are meant to extend to our children, our grandchildren, and beyond. When we live lives that are faithful to God and use his blessings for his purposes, we set in motion a legacy of blessing that can impact future generations. Our faithfulness to steward God's blessings well can leave a lasting imprint on the lives of those who come after us. God's blessings, therefore, are never just about us. They are about what God wants to do through us for others and for his glory. As we understand this truth, we begin to shift our perspective from one of selfishness and self-interest to one of generosity and service. We realize that when God blesses us, it is not an end in itself. It is a means to a much larger purpose. God's blessings are meant to be shared, to multiply, and to impact the world in ways we may never fully understand. As we embrace this truth, we become more mindful of how we use the blessings God has given us and more intentional about allowing those blessings to overflow into the lives of others, creating a ripple effect that extends far beyond what we can see. As we reflect on the power and reach of God's blessings, it becomes clear that his gifts are never just for us alone. His blessings are designed to impact more than just the recipient. They are meant to flow through us, touching the lives of others and fulfilling his greater purpose in the world. From the very beginning, God's blessings were never meant to be hoarded or kept to ourselves. Instead, they are tools for building up his kingdom, serving others, and spreading his love and grace throughout the world. When we receive God's blessings, we must remember that they carry with them a responsibility. We are called to steward them well, using them to serve those around us, to care for those in need, and to share the good news of his love with a hurting world. Just as Abraham's blessing was meant to bless all nations, and just as Jesus called us to be a light to the world, we too are called to let God's blessings shine through us, impacting the lives of others in ways we may never fully understand. In our daily lives, we must be aware that the blessings we receive are not for us to keep but to give away. Whether through acts of kindness, financial generosity, or sharing our time and talents, we are called to be vessels through which God's blessings can flow. When we do this, we participate in his redemptive work, building a legacy of blessing that extends far beyond ourselves, touching families, communities, and future generations. Ultimately, God's blessings are a reflection of his love, his faithfulness, and his desire to see his kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. As we embrace the truth that God's blessings impact more than just us, we can live with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that we are part of something much greater than ourselves. Our lives are meant to be a reflection of his goodness, and by sharing his blessings with others, we fulfill our calling to be his hands and feet in a world that desperately needs his light.